Chavez Foundation, which is a new foundation and initiatives and projects forward. He assists in 4 funds, so in communications, housing and economic development, education, and National Chavez Center. He is the youngest son of Socorro and Paul Chavez, Cesar Chavez's middle son. Andres grew up in La Paz in King, California, which now hosts the Cesar Chavez National Monument. He was raised in the farm worker movement, which was founded by his grandfather, Cesar Chavez. He grew up greeting visitors, taking them on tours, and sharing his grandfather's history, as well as participating in countless marches, rallies, picket lines, demonstrations, and political campaigns. Andres did graduate magna cum laude from CSU Bakersfield in 2016 with his bachelor's in public, excuse me while I move this, sorry. Policy and administration, sorry, I was blocking my screen there. And then he was also active in student and community life, organizing immigration rights rallies, and he is the first Hispanic Heritage Month observances and opening and community garden in an underserved neighborhood. After serving as political director for Emilio Huerta's Central Valley campaign in California's 21st Congressional District, he helped establish the high school equivalency program at CSU Sacramento, helping farm workers obtain their GED degrees. Andres worked with California State Fair and Exposition, the public agency with running the state fair and aiding its legislative outreach and lobbying efforts. During his free time, he loves to barbecue and spend time with his family and friends. And so with that, go ahead and join me in giving a warm welcome, virtual applause to Andres Chavez.
Thank you, Mario. Thank you, everyone. It's so great to be with you all this afternoon. I just want to first start off by saying on behalf of the Cesar Chavez Foundation, the Chavez family, and all of us in the farm worker movement, we just want to thank Reedley College and the Latino Faculty Staff Association at Reedley College for allowing us to come and share a little bit about the life and legacy of my grandfather, Cesar. I also want to give and take a little bit of time here to give a special thank you to Vanessa Leyva, who's been extremely helpful in making sure that one, I'm organized, but getting me information in a very timely fashion. There's a lot of work that goes into kind of planning these events behind the scenes, and we're managing about 60 of these, and Vanessa's been, one of the better folks to work with. So Vanessa, I can't see you, but mil gracias. Thank you very, very much. Folks, I hope to have a presentation for you. There's some videos built into it. I'm hoping to get through it relatively quickly, because my favorite part of these discussions, if you will, are to chat with the students and to chat with the staff and faculty and really hear what questions you would like answered. And so as I'm going through my presentation, should you have any questions, make note of it, and then we can spend some time here at the end to kind of answer those questions and discuss them a bit. But Mario, if there's nothing else that we need to go over, I'm happy to start my presentation.
All righty, go right ahead.
All right, thank you so much. One second, the computer's acting a little slow here. Now, somebody's going to be managing the kind of people coming in and out, right? Okay.
Yes, so once again, everyone, just an FYI, you've all been muted, but if you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to throw it in the chat and we'll go ahead and have those questions answered. Again, I know Andres mentioned that he'll have some Q&A. You'll be able to raise your hand or do some sort of reaction on Zoom. And then if you want to unmute yourself, we'll go ahead and let you do that.
Very cool. And this is my second Zoom presentation, so bear with me. Usually we're there in person. It's not too difficult, fortunately, but if I slip up here, just bear with me. Can y'all see that? Okay, the screen. Okay, very cool. Well, I'll get into a little bit of information about myself. I know that Nadia read way too long of a bio for me, so I'll just try to shorten it up here a little bit. But I was born on January 28th, 1994. My grandfather passed away in 1993, so I was unable to meet my Tata Cesar. But I've been able to learn a lot about his life and his legacy and his work through traveling around and speaking with folks like you all, but also through family stories and recollections that they have. So I was born in Bakersfield, California. I've been a lifelong resident in the Central Valley. The only other place I've lived is Sacramento, and that's technically the Central Valley as well, right? And so here I am. I think I'm just a few months old there. You can see I have a lot of hair, and so that's a good thing. I hope that sticks with me forever. I am, I guess, like you heard in the bio, I'm the son of Paul and Socorro Chavez. This is my dad here, and what is one of my first snowstorms, and there's my mom, Socorro Chavez, who was Socorro Perez Chica. She was a farm worker. She lived in the town of McFarland, was too poor to go to college. She was working at McDonald's, and when she was working at McDonald's, these UFW organizers talked to her, and they said, "Well, you seem relatively smart. You're doing, you're doing a great job here at McDonald's. Why don't you come and dedicate your life to the cause of the farm workers?" Well, she worked in the fields as a kid. Her parents were farm workers, and so she said, "Why not? I can go there and I can get some skills. College is out of reach for me, so I'm going to do it." So, at the young age of 18, she went over there and began her volunteer career, making I think like $10 a week or something like that. Obviously, room and boarding was taken care of, but that's how her and my dad met. I'm one of 31 grandchildren, so you may have heard other Chavezes speak or other descendants of my tata speak all up and down the state or throughout the United States. You can see we're a big family. This is one of the family photos we have together. Now we're all dressed a little nicer for this event because this is when they named the Cesar E. Chavez National Mine. This is when they did the USNS Cesar Chavez, which was a Navy ship. So there's a lot of us, and I just happen to be one of 31, and you can see my grandmother there in the very middle uh, with the pink turtleneck on, holding the flowers. She unfortunately passed away in 2016, so we miss her very dearly. Growing up, I always wanted to be a mariachi, and like all of mariachi seemed to have a lasting impression on folks, and they sure had an impression on me. And so I would dress like this to every family party, and I used to have a guitar, but I soon realized that I wasn't that good of a singer. I had no rhythm, and I definitely couldn't play an instrument. So my days of being a mariachi were short-lived, and I instead decided to focus on sports and school. After high school, I went on to California State University, Bakersfield, and graduated with a degree in public policy administration. You can see here's a picture of my family, picture on the right with my mom and my siblings, and the picture on the left with my dad and my siblings. And so my time at CSUB was extremely great. I really enjoyed my time there. I received a very quality education. So if some of you are looking at Cal State Bakersfield as a potential option, I definitely encourage you to take it seriously. And if there's anything I can do to be helpful in that process, please let me know. Now I work as the Director of Strategic Initiatives with the Cesar Chavez Foundation. You heard very briefly in the bio some of the work that we did, and potentially in the Q&A we can get into more of this. But we do a lot of work in housing and affordable and in housing, primarily affordable housing. We have about 5,000 units throughout the Southwestern United States. Some of you may have heard La Campesina. I'm not sure what the frequency number is there in y'all's area. It used to be 90.5. Now I think it's 106.3 there. But La Campesina is our network radio station. And so we use radio as a way to entertain and educate folks. And then we have the National Chavez Center, which really works to promote the life and legacy of Cesar, as well as our education fund, which works on developing products and services that address educational equity gaps. And so my job is to support all of those in a little way. But my job is always changing. I'm always doing different things, and so it makes it very fun. So a lot of people these days often ask themselves the question, who is Cesar Chavez? And I think because there's so many folks on here, I'm not going to open this up to the group. I usually like to get kind of an idea of who he is, but I'm going to share a short video with you very quickly, should it decide to work, that I think really doesn't hit on the specifics, but talks about the impact that him and the farm workers movement had on us all and had on the United States and the world.
50 years ago, an unassuming man from the fields of California rose up in the light of a new dawn. With little more than an 8th grade education and only the money he drew from an honest day's work, Cesar Chavez stepped into the shoes of the everyman to fight for justice, opportunity, and change. A modest man seeking only to serve his brothers and sisters in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges. This man found his voice in the spirit of a movement. 50 years ago, the oppressed assembled into lines of peaceful yet forceful opposition to age-old abuses and were heard for the first time. In them, a beautiful message of hope and strength echoed throughout the great American landscape. Sacrifices beyond the ordinary were made. Mothers left their children in the care of family and friends. Husbands left their jobs. Students took assignments they'd never planned for. Everyone believed that change was possible if they remained focused, resolute, and faithful. What met Cesar and the founders on the road of this movement was trying, to say the least. From physical pain to emotional strife, outward racism, and even self-doubt. The calling was not an easy one to answer, but it was a matter of human dignity, and no price was too high to pay for the freedoms afforded by equality.
We attack that injustice not by complaining, not by seeking handouts. We organize.
The change brought about through this movement has been felt for decades across communities, for people of all backgrounds.
Once social change begins, it cannot be
But
reversed.
as always, there is more work to do. At every turn, a new threat to freedom, a new darkness penetrating progress.
We have looked into the future, and the future is ours.
Now, more than ever, we must take the foundation that has been left to us by Cesar and his hermanos y hermanas and find our own voice. We must use our collective spirit to make change. We must not be silent when the night appears to be darkest.
It's very important to us that people question, that they participate, and that they're never afraid to have some principle and stand by that principle.
Today is the day Cesar spoke of. Today is the day that we make our own path and determine our own future.
So I hope that video, y'all were able to see it. I know that sometimes it can lag a little bit, but I hope that it was relatively decent for y'all to kind of get an idea. If not, I think you can hear in the narration, the impact and the power of the movement. I'm going to start this presentation by talking to you a little bit about who Cesar was as an individual and where he came from and how that really inspired him to begin organizing workers. He was born on March 31st, 1927. You can see a photo of him when he was a kid. In Yuma, Arizona. If you take a look at that photo there, this is just outside of Yuma. That little adobe brick hut there is actually where his family used to live. His family used to homestead there, and they had a small family farm, only a few acres. And so at the very beginning of my Tata Cesar's life was relatively comfortable. They didn't have to worry about necessarily eating that night. The bills were paid for the most part. My great grandfather was a decent provider, but that all changed shortly after the Depression, when my Tata Cesar, like many other folks and their families, lost their small family farms and were forced to become migrant farm workers. And they were kicked into the migrant stream of California. And if you take a look at the photo there, that's Cesar in the hat. On the migrant stream, they faced a lot of different abuses. There was lots of racism. My Tata Cesar recalled telling stories of when they went to a place and his dad wanted to order some coffee, and on the window outside the coffee shop, they had not seen it when they walked in, but the waitress, when my great grandfather ordered coffee, pointed at the sign, and the sign said, "No Negroes, no dogs, and no Mexicans." And so that talked about the racism that existed here in the Central Valley of California. This wasn't something that was unique to the urban South or to the South, but was very prevalent here in the Central Valley. His time on the migrant stream was also very tough because they're traveling from place to place, and it ultimately ended up having an effect on his education. I don't know the exact number, but it said that he went to well over 30 schools throughout his time. And that was only between the time of kindergarten and 8th grade. He only went to the 8th grade and was forced to drop out after the 8th grade because his family was getting older, and he needed to help provide for the family and put some more food on the table. And so in the 8th grade, he dropped out. He ended up working in the fields from the 8th grade till about he was 18 years old, and then decided that he was going to go to the Navy. Like many people of color, like many folks who are poor, sometimes they often go to the military as a way to kind of get some technical skills or get some hard skills, or use it as a way to pay for their school. I don't know that that program was around back then. Nonetheless, my thought that this would be a great opportunity for him to get out of the fields. And so he went to the Navy, and though he had a good time because he developed long-lasting friendships and got to see parts of the world that he had never seen before, it was also a very difficult time because at that time racism was still very prevalent in the armed forces. And so he never really graduated beyond being a deck sweeper. And so you can see that his time in the Navy he had mixed feelings about it. He loved his country, but his country always didn't show him the same love, right? And so after leaving the Navy, he went back to working in the fields, and it was actually on one of his trips back when he met Helen Fabella. He was in Delano, and he went to this gas station that was named People's Market. And at that gas station, he filled up and he began to start chopping it up and talking with the gas station attendant. And the next day he decided he wanted to come back for some more gas. And the day after that, he came back for some more gas. And he came back for gas one more day after, and finally grew up the courage to ask what is now my grandmother to go on a date. So those of you who drive know that we don't need gas every single day. But Caesar seemed to need gas every single day because I think he was a little smitten by my grandmother. And so they hit it off right away. They both loved jazz music. They both loved to dance. My Nana Helen was a wonderful dancer. My Tata Caesar, not so much. I seem to, I think, get some of those traits from him. We both have 2 left feet. But nonetheless, they really enjoyed each other's company, and they had a lot of fun. And they were soon married shortly after. The picture on the right is actually of them in Monterey, in the Monterey Peninsula on their honeymoon. And what they did for the honeymoon, because they were both, devout Catholics, and their faith played a large part in their life, was they actually visited the California missions. Their favorite mission of them all was the Santa Barbara mission. Soon after, they had a family, and they began to build that family fast and furious. They went from having 1 kid to 8 kids very quickly. And so here's a family photo of them. When my Tata Caesar had left the Navy and had met my Nana Helen, they were living up in San Jose. And it was in San Jose where my Tata Caesar really began to get involved in organizing. And he was introduced to organizing through his parish priest there in the San Jose neighborhood of Sal Si Puedes, Get Out If You Can. And his parish priest was the one who introduced him to the social justice teachings of the Catholic Church. And while he was there, he also was introduced to Fred Ross, who later on ended up becoming his mentor, his organizing mentor, and also served as a mentor to Dolores Huerta. While in San Jose, my Tata Caesar got into community organizing, soon got a job with the Community Service Organization, and was moving up and down the state to do different things and develop different chapters of the Community Service Organization. And while being in the Community Service Organization, they were doing stuff around voter registration. They were doing stuff around getting streetlights in low-income neighborhoods because they knew that reduced crime. They were working against issues like police brutality. And so my Tata Caesar actually began to really find his craft and became the staff director for the Community Service Organization. And that actually afforded him a pretty decent life. For the first time in his life, he didn't have to worry about putting food on the table for his families. He was wearing a suit and tie to work almost every single day. He had a Brooks Brothers credit card. I don't know how many of you know Brooks Brothers, but it's definitely out of my price range these days, but not for Cesar Chavez, a young Chicano in the 1950s. He was doing pretty well. And to top it all off, he was driving a 2-door sports car, a white Volvo. And with that Volvo, you would think, what is this Chicano with 8 kids doing driving a 2-door sports car, right? But he was doing relatively well for himself. But my Tata Caesar always remembered what it was like being a farm worker. And he pushed the Community Service Organization to go and do something for farm workers. He remembered the life that he had shared with them, the miserable working conditions, the bad housing. Here's a picture of some farm worker housing. Now, a lot of people who are from this time frame will say, wow, that's great farm worker housing. And you look at them, you say, that's dilapidated, janky housing there. What are you talking about? But they said, well, there's a roof over your head. Oftentimes farm workers slept underneath the stars. Sometimes they'd go to parks and camp out in parks. Other times they were promised housing and weren't given housing. My Tata Caesar recalled telling my dad stories of when they'd be driving. My dad would tell me stories, I should say, when him and his dad were driving down Highway 99, and my Tata would point to something and say, oh, you see that park right there? Oh, you see that bridge? That's where we used to sleep at when we were picking stone fruit, peaches, and apricots in Selma, or whatever it was, right? And the truth was that this experience wasn't unique to him. It was the experience of entire generations of people. This wasn't unique to the Chavez family. This was the experience of probably a lot of your families who are here in this room today. There was things like child labor that still existed, right? This is obviously an older photo, and I just wanted to illustrate that child labor was very prevalent, and even young white, poor whites, Okies and Arkies, also used to labor in the fields. There was the use of pesticides. Now there's some pesticides regulation, but farm workers would be working. And as they were working, imagine them being underneath that crop duster and these pesticides would spray over them and they'd come coughing. And a lot of people point to these pesticides as the reason why there was cancer clusters later in the 80s and 90s in places like McFarland and Delano and Early Mart. You had no heat protections. Now, fortunately, here in the state of California, if it gets too hot, people are able to stop working. Before, there was no heat protections, and so you had lots of deaths by heat stroke and cardiac arrest and over exhaustion, things of that nature. Sexual harassment was very prevalent in the fields, as it continues to be. Male supervisors and foremen and mayordomos were asking for favors out of women, and the average life expectancy was 49 years of age. My Tata knew as a young kid that something always had to be done. And even when he went back to working in the fields, when he first met my Nana Helen and they were trying to figure out what they were going to do, he'd always tell my Nana Helen, somebody's got to do something about this. Somebody's got to do something about this. But I don't think he ever thought that it was going to be him. Well, actually, what few people know is that Caesar wasn't the one who started the grape strike. It was actually brave Filipino farm workers who started the strike. You can see the sign here that says AWOC, AFL-CIO picket. AWOC stands for the Agricultural Workers Organizing Committee. Now, that was made up of largely Filipino farm workers. The struggle of the Filipino farm workers was extremely difficult here in the Central Valley of California and throughout the United States. And part of that reason was that there was laws, the anti-miscegenation laws, that prohibited these individuals from marrying, but there was also the laws that prohibited them from owning land, from owning cars. And so essentially they were here as indentured servants, as people who were just here to work the land and use their hands. And so as they began to get older in their lives, you can see that they're older here. These photos were taken in 65. As they began to get older in their life, they began to think about what their future was going to look like, what a potential retirement, if you will. I don't think they ever could retire, but what that may look like. And so they were starting to demand that they get paid more. The Filipino workers were wise men. The Manangs, they'd been around for years. They had been involved in different labor disputes, and they knew, along with Caesar and the others, that the favorite tactic of the growers when folks would go on strike was to pit the races against one another. What they would do when Filipino workers would go out on strike, they'd go to Latino labor force and they'd say, hey, we'll pay you a little bit more so you break the strike. And so farm workers were never able truly to organize because they were always putting the races against one another. A lot of the ramifications of those decisions back in the 50s and 60s still have effects on us today, with the racial tensions that exist between Black and Latino communities and Asian and Latino communities and this and that. It's unfortunate. And I think as younger generations, we're working to fix that, but there was definitely ramifications that these tactics definitely still had today. So on September 8th, they go out on strike, and knowing that they didn't want this effort to fail, they reached out to the emerging National Farm Workers Association, which was my Tata Cesar and Dolores Huerta's Workers Association. Now, they weren't a union at that time. At that time, they were only providing direct services to workers. You see, my Tata understood that workers weren't just workers. They went home to a whole new set of issues. And so what he decided he wanted to do was provide services for 10 years. And for 10 years, he wanted to provide services. And then after 10 years, then he was going to call a general strike of grapes and stuff like that. Well, he started in 1962, and in 1965, 3 years later, 7 years before his master plan was going to work out, that kind of got upended by the Filipino farm workers. And so on September 16th, 1965, the NFWA joined the AWOC, and was really the birth of a multicultural movement that would forever change the course of American history and the course of our lives for sure, especially here in the Central Valley. The decision was hard to make for the NFWA. They were a young emerging organization. They had very little money, but it was Helen Chavez, my grandmother, who simply asked the question, well, are we a union or not? And when she asked that question, that pretty much settled the score, and they knew that they had to be in. What I'm going to talk about now is the next 5 years and just some things that happened, some historic innovations that can be accredited to the farm worker movement and can really point to the reason why we continue to celebrate the farm worker movement and my Tata Caesar today, but also things that had never really been used in traditional farm labor or even labor disputes. And the first one was the march from Sacramento, from Delano to Sacramento. That was in 1966, over 300 miles. Started off with, I think, more than a couple dozen workers. And before you know it, people from all walks of life began to join. They began to talk to workers up and down the valley at each stop, and the crowd began to get a little bigger and a little bigger. Then kids began to join because they didn't want to see their parents suffer anymore. Clergy members and community groups and other folks who saw the farm workers struggle, who had experienced themselves, began to join them. And before you knew it, 10,000 people were with them when they arrived at Sacramento. They arrived in Sacramento at the state capitol on Easter Sunday, 1966. That really brought the plight of the American farm worker to the American public. And so what happened in 1966, later that year, Cesar Chavez appears on the cover of Time magazine. Things are going well. Things seem to be going in the right direction. They feel like they're making progress. Well, the growers weren't going to have any of that. They were so upset that these farm workers, that these poor Latino and Filipino workers and other minorities were rising up. And so they said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to go to our other favorite tactic. We're going to start beating the hell out of strikers like we've done before, and we're going to bust the strike that way. And so what began to happen is that the workers began to get beat up. And like anybody, they said, you know, you're not just going to sit here and hit me. We're going to retaliate. But my Tata Caesar believed in nonviolence because he had seen the work of Mahatma Gandhi. He had read about the work of Dr. Martin Luther King, and he knew that nonviolence was more powerful than violence. He knew that violence was a shortcut. And so he decided that he had not done enough as a leader, as an individual, to prohibit the farm workers and the members of the farm worker movement from wishing to retaliate. And so he decided that he was going to fast for 25 days until everybody in the farm worker movement rededicated their lives to nonviolence. For 25 days, he didn't eat, bringing a lot of suffering to his own body. But when people began to see that this man was willing to sacrifice his life for what he believed in, it resonated very strongly with people who not only were farm workers, but with other folks, including Senator Robert F. Kennedy, somebody who at that time was on the verge of a presidential run, but also came from one of the most powerful families, if not the most powerful family in America. And so when Senator Kennedy came out to Delano, California and spent time with Caesar and broke fast with him, that was another significant and key moment in the farm worker struggle. By this point, they had realized that the efforts that they were doing in Delano and in and around the Central Valley were really not working in their favor. And so they said, we have to take this fight outside of the place where everything's working against us. The courthouses and the jails were working against them. The big institutions, both political and social, were working against them. And so they said, we have a noble cause. People deserve to hear what's happening in the fields of California. And so we're going to go to the American public and we're going to tell our story. And they went to tell their story with one simple request, and that was to stop buying California grapes. And so they sent out farm workers who had never left the Central Valley, who had never left. The only other place they had gone to is maybe Mexico. They sent them like places like Boston and New York and Toronto and Missouri and Pittsburgh and all over. And they made an appeal to middle-class white moms and urban consumers and from folks from all walks of life. And they said, stop buying grapes. The grape boycott, I thought there's another slide there. The grape boycott began to have a lot of success, not only here in the United States, but also internationally. Cesar Chavez made a trip to the UK and they began to stop buying grapes over there. we heard stories of Chicano soldiers in Vietnam saying, we're not going to eat grapes because the way you're treating our people back home. This is not what we fight for. And so they began to stop eating grapes in Vietnam. There was a story I heard of a little boy. He said he remembered when he was in preschool, that he was in class and he was he was only 4 years old. He ended up making a documentary on the movement, but he says that he remembers he was in the San Fernando Valley doing preschool, and they served that day for lunch some grapes on the side with their meal. And all the little kids were there and they said, hey, we're not supposed to eat grapes. Our parents aren't eating grapes. And so they threw away all the grapes that they served that day. And so the school stopped buying grapes. And so there was little things that were happening like that. And fortunately, all those efforts led to people stopping to buy grapes. And finally, they began to put pressure on the pocketbooks, not the struggle, not the working conditions, but the pocketbooks of the growers. And it led to victory. It led to the signing of the first union contracts for farm workers in the United States. Here's a photo of them at 40 acres, John Giamara Sr. and Caesar signing the first contracts that they negotiated. It was a 5-year-long battle, but that's really what brought Caesar and the farm workers' plight to the American public, and what really created the first enduring union for farm workers in the country. And that's out of place, sorry. I'm going to share another quick video with you if it loads really quickly that pretty much just sums up everything I said in 2 minutes and does it a lot nicer. So.
This is Caesar. Wrong Caesar. Chavez. No, not him. Cesar Chavez. Not him either. This is Cesar Chavez. You know, the one who was born in Yuma, Arizona, worked in the fields, joined the Navy, started a family, and because of his life's work, ended up with his own national monument, a Presidential Medal of Freedom, Time magazine cover, statues, murals, murals, murals. The man has lots of murals. A Google Doodle, his own holiday in 3 U.S. states, Apple ads, stamps. Do you have a stamp? You don't have a stamp. Libraries, schools, parks, streets, highways, and a naval ship, all named after him. A ship? Yeah, a ship. And when people compare him to famous Americans, they use words like inspiration, pioneer, luminary, legend, hero. But why? It all started with a grape. Well, lots of grapes.
All of us are looking for a union for farm workers.
Cesar Chavez fought for farm workers' rights to a fair wage, lunch breaks, bathrooms, and access to clean water. He had a vision of equality and social change for all people, and some people agreed. Our separate struggles are really one, a struggle for freedom, for dignity, and for humanity. We are together with you in spirit and determination that our dreams for a better tomorrow will be realized. In 1962, we co-founded a group that became the first successful farm workers union in American history, steadfast in nonviolence. He marched with supporters 340 miles to the state capitol, completed a 25-day water-only fast, all in the middle of a grape boycott that swept the nation for 5 years until victory for thousands of farm workers. Cesar Chavez continued his fight for farm workers until his death in 1993, but his message of nonviolence, unity, justice, and the rights of all people continues on today. He's Cesar Chavez, an American, a hero. You can honor Chavez. Go to...
That video is a little older, so there's some old content at the end that I just skipped through. If you're thinking, wow, Andres could have done that whole talk that he gave us for 20 minutes right now so much faster, you're right, because they did a very good job at doing it there. Before I wrap up, I just want to just kind of leave us with a few points that I think we can take away from the farm workers. I think what we learned from them was that all people, regardless of your age, regardless of your gender, regardless of your race, background, deserve to be treated equally and fairly. We also learned that we're powerful when we work together. The example of the Filipino and Latino workers coming together, but then also going to the American public, to white consumer house moms, and going to other civil rights groups throughout the country, and going to college students, and showing that when we work together and we organize, we can be extremely powerful. One of the things that I like to do when I'm in person is we have the farm workers clap, where we start nice and slow and then we work faster. And it's incredible when I pull one person out of the group and I say, hey, Vanessa, you go to the center of the class all by yourself and you clap all by yourself. And you hear it and it's just a little lousy clap. And, you know, Vanessa's given it all that she can, and, you know, and we appreciate that. But when Mario joins and when others join and I join and Sean and other folks begin to join, you begin to see how powerful we can be. And that's a prime example of when we work together, we can be powerful. So when we work together as a community, when we work together as a student body, when we work together as members of this country, it's incredible what we can do and the amount of good that we can create. And the other thing that they showed us was that ordinary people can do extraordinary things. This was the poorest of this nation's poor, who rose up, and through their persistence and through their conviction, they were to show that they were able to change something that historically never been changed before. People often ask me, what are the lessons that I learned from my Tata Caesar? The first thing I learned goes back to that idea of ordinary people doing extraordinary things, that you don't have to be rich or powerful to make a difference. My Tata never made more than $5,000 a year. He never owned a home, but you see the difference that he was able to make. And I think that speaks to my next point of that the next Cesar Chavez of Dolores Huerta could be in this Zoom room with us today. That when we look at the abilities and we look at what we have here today and some of the mentors that are in this room, that if we work hard, it's incredible what we can do. And the last thing that my Tata taught us was that you only lose when you give up. So if you continue to work hard, despite the trials and tribulations, besides the up and downs, because times are going to get tough, we can guarantee it. But times get to going tough. I think if there's one thing that you can remember from my Tata's legacy and the legacy of the farm workers is look at what they were able to do, all the sacrifices and the hardships that they were able to make so that we could be in this room today, so that we can sit in college courses as people of color, as Latinos, as women, right? People paved the way for us to do that. But the only way that they were able to do that was through their persistence and by never giving up. And so we ask you to always remember the words, si se puede. Thank you all very much. And I'm done with my presentation.
Wow, so powerful. And I really love the way you ended that and just how, it's so true. And that so many of our future, leaders, can you guys see that, the welcome? I just want to make sure that, cool. You're so right in that so many of our leaders, tomorrow's leaders can be in this room. I know we have a mix of audience today, this afternoon. We have a lot of faculty and staff from Greeley College, and I also know that there's some current high school students from Dinuba High School, and so that was really powerful right there. And actually, I do have a question from one of those students, and his question is, how are cities like Dinuba impacted by the farm labor movement of the 60s and 70s?
Well, I'm going to give you a very specific example of how Dinuba has been impacted by the farm worker movement. And I'm going to use the case of an individual. There was this individual, his name was Marcos Camacho. He grew up in Dinuba. He was the son of immigrants. His parents were farm workers. He got involved in the farm worker movement through his parents. And as he was a volunteer, he always had aspirations to do something great in his life. And he wasn't really sure what he wanted to do, but was very sharp, was very smart. And the UFW at that time had a legal apprenticeship program. And that legal apprenticeship program, essentially trained people how to become attorneys without having to go to law school. It was built for the children of farm workers who couldn't afford to go to law school. Fast forward so many years, he becomes an attorney through the leadership apprenticeship program without ever going to law school, passing the bar on his first attempt, which is very difficult. And today, now he goes by Judge Marcos Camacho. So that's the example of one person, a kid of farm workers who never went to law school, but now is a Superior Court judge. And the truth is that the example that he shows to other folks there in Dinuba is that if this person was able to go on and become a Superior Court judge, there's no reason, like I said, why y'all can't, as high school students, go out and do wonderful things. And we look at the bigger picture, we look at the working conditions, and we look at what's changed because of it. And the truth was that Dinuba would probably look a lot different if it wasn't for the work of the movement. The institutions would probably be the same, or people would continue to be as oppressed. There is a lot of work to be done. Don't get us wrong there. But I think we all enjoy a better quality of life, especially in these small farm towns, because of the work of the movement. So I think kind of looking at the macro, but also looking at the individual success stories of people who come out of places like Dinuba really points to the success and also the impact that it's had on the larger community, but more specifically the community you asked about.
Thank you. And I know we got another comment from one of our faculty members. She just mentioned stories like Cesar Chavez's need to be told and retold. They need to be heard by all of us. And many times these stories are omitted from school curriculum. So thank you for sharing your personal experiences, and thank you for the work that you do. Great presentation. And then we also have another question. Thank you so much for your inspiring presentation. And I think this is actually a question that many other people in the room probably have. But how do you feel personally about carrying on the legacy of such a larger than life grandfather?
That's a tough question for me to answer always. I think carrying on the legacy, those are some really big shoes to fill. So easy with all the pressure you're putting on me right after lunch. But what I will say is that there's never really been any pressure on us to carry on his work in any way. I think the only pressure that was ever put on us was that whatever we decide to do, that we do it with the mindset of serving others. I thought that Caesar always used to say that he used to say that is my deepest belief, that only by giving our lives do we find life. And that's something that stuck with us from a very young age. I can remember being a boy and volunteering at things, and just kind of understanding the impact of what it means to God and be of service. And so not a lot of pressure, but the pressure really has been to make sure that whatever we choose to do to God and be of service to others. And so I happen to be one of the 31 grandchildren who continues to work within the farm workers movement and continues to work with farm workers and working people and Latinos. But there's some of my other cousins who don't work within the movement, but they also continue to play their role in making sure that they bring about a more just society and make their communities a little better.
Thank you. I know Dr. B, who asked that question, she comments, amen and amen. Thank you so much for these words. Be the change you want to see. Our next question is, what kind of work does the Caesar Foundation do now, and how is the foundation funded?
Yeah, very good question. I saw that question in the chat box. So I briefly mentioned our housing and economic development. We've invested about $900 million in underserved communities in California, Arizona, Texas, New Mexico, and Nevada. We also have the radio stations that we use as a way to, the idea behind radio was to go and use entertainment as a way to attract large numbers of audiences and of people listening. And then when they're listening, what we do is we hit them with these little kind of subliminal messages or educational messages, if you will, about the importance of getting vaccinated, the importance of voting. One of the things that we did with the radio stations as well is that we knew that in Spanish media, there was a lot of anti-Blackness, and there's a lot of racism that exists within Spanish media. And so we called upon ourselves and we said, we have to be better than all the other folks in Spanish media. And so we acknowledge the anti-Blackness that exists within the Latino community. But what we tried to do during this summer with BLM is we try to show the humanity of the Black community. And that was at the kind of request of some of the folks who were working with us from the Black community. And they said, look at Andres, if you want to highlight, how folks can become more accepting, show them that Black moms and dads are just like Latino moms and dads, and they want the best for their kids, and they want the best for their community. Show that we're hard workers, and that we face the same exact issues that y'all face. And so what we did is we showed the humanity of our brothers and sisters in the Black and African American community. And at the very beginning, I'll be completely honest, some of our audience was not totally excited about it. We got some very bad mail, but by the end of it all, we had more people reaching out to us and saying, thank you so much for helping me better understand the struggle of the BLM. And thank you very much for opening up my mind. And so we do things like that in the Cesar Chavez Foundation with our communications fund, really using communications as a way to educate and entertain folks and move them to action. We have our education fund, like I said, that works on closing some of the equity gaps that exist by developing innovative products and services that we offer to school districts. And then we do the work of the National Chavez Center, which goes out and shares about the life and legacy of Cesar Chavez and tries to use my grandfather's legacy as a way and as a vehicle to inspire folks to go out and be of service to their communities and be the leaders of tomorrow. In terms of the funding, one of the things that makes us a little different than most organizations, most nonprofits, is that and I really have to credit my dad with this, nobody else, my dad, Paul Chavez. what he'd noticed was that a lot of nonprofits are always relying on grant dollars and on grant funding. And so while they're relying on these grant dollars and grant funding, what happens is that in times of economic downturns or recession, then that money and that pool of money also dries up. Or the other thing that happens is, let's say there's a event that happens and it completely rocks the world, or whatever it may be. And then all the funders and the folks in philanthropy will automatically run to the next thing. And so if you're committed to a mission and you're trying to stay on a straight line and you're always chasing dollars, you're going left and right. And so what my dad decided was that, one, he didn't like people telling us how we thought we should help people, because a lot of philanthropists and grant funders have this very top down kind of view of how people should be helped. It's very patronizing and paternalistic. But the other thing too that he realized is that during times of economic hardships and downturns, we need to make sure that we're also recession proof and that we're also downturn proof, and that because it's during those times that the communities we hope to serve need the most help. And so the way that we fund our work is everything is a fee for service model. And what we've noticed in working with hardworking communities and working folks is that nobody ever really wants anything for free. But what we have is essentially is a social contract with our community, that if you rent an apartment complex from us, we expect you to pay your rent on time. But at the same exact time, you also have the right to criticize us if we're not, servicing your work orders fast enough, or if we're not taking care of things. The same thing goes with our radio stations. We use our access to people to sell advertisements, and we use those advertisements as a way to fund our work. And so we consider ourselves social entrepreneurs. And so that's how a lot of our work is done. We do some fundraising now, more than we have done in the past, to support some of our education work and the work of the National Chavez Center. But for the most part, we like to develop our own economic systems, so that we can determine how we do our work, and that we can stay laser focused on what we call our North Star.
And along those lines, so I'm going to kind of go with two questions in one, see if you can answer that. So the question is, does the foundation only have education programs, or do they still legally support farm workers? And what is the status of farm workers in California today?
Yeah, very good question. So the foundation works with working people and works with farm workers and the communities that we serve. But the United Farm Workers and United Farm Workers Foundation, the two our brothers and sisters in the farm worker movement, continue to work with workers on a daily basis. What does the status of farm workers look like here in California? The status of farm workers here in California, we can argue, is better than any other status of farm workers in the country and perhaps in the world. Just a couple years ago, we passed farm worker overtime for the first time, which was a hard fought battle. This may seem crazy to you all, but farm workers weren't in fact entitled to overtime pay, which was just nuts. And the reason why they were historically left out of a lot of labor protections, including overtime and other stuff, was that organized labor had some very kind of racist backgrounds. And so if you look at the National Labor Relations Act that was passed back in the 1900s, sometimes early 1900s, I think it was the 40s, I believe it was passed in. It excluded two groups of people: farm workers and domestic workers. And if I ask you all the question, well, what ethnicities and races make up domestic and farm workers at that time? It was blacks, and it was Mexicans and Latinos and other minorities. And so we were left out on this very racist reason. And so to fight for farm workers' rights has always been that much tougher. But unfortunately, here in California, there is a minimum wage for farm workers. There is overtime for farm workers. There are heat protections, but there's some areas where we need to make more work, where we need to do better. Areas like immigration reform. Right now, we have a lot of workers who are over here. They're contributing to this economy. They're contributing to this country, and they're contributing to our societies. Yet they're not afforded the opportunity to become American citizens. And so right now, there's some legislation up in Congress that will make it possible for a pathway to citizenship if you are a farm worker. And so that's something that we're very supportive of, and that the United Farm Workers was very instrumental in helping pass. And then there's other issues on pesticides regulation. Pesticides regulation has been happening for some time, but it's a relatively new area. What we continue to see is that farm workers are exposed to pesticides and they continue to get sick. It gets into our groundwater, and it has devastating effects on our communities. And so some of the big work that they're working on is, pesticide regulation and controls to make sure that we take care of the worker at every single place. So the state of farm workers is better than it once was, but it could always be better. I think oftentimes a lot of people don't see farm workers as professionals. But if you look at their craft, you couldn't just take me out there today and say, Andres, go do this. It would be very difficult for me to do. It'd be very difficult for most of you to do unless you've spent some time in the fields recently, right? And so these folks are in fact professionals. And I think the other thing that we have to understand is, the COVID-19 pandemic has really shed light on the importance of our farm workers. Farm workers are one of the industries most likely to die, right? And the other thing is that regardless of the heat, regardless of the pandemic, regardless of firestorms, guess who's always out there working their butts off? It's farm workers. This year, we've seen a lot of disruptions to our life. We've seen disruptions to the places that we go to eat. We've seen disruptions to the places that we go to entertain ourselves. We've seen toilet paper run out. We've seen people go crazy over water. We've seen people do all types of things because there's been breaks in supply, or things have broken down over time. We've seen shortages in all different parts. Right now, if you want to order furniture, it takes you 3 times, 4 times longer to get your furniture than you usually would because there's a shortage. Let me tell you the one thing that has not been interrupted since this pandemic, and it's been our food supply. And the reason why our food supply has not been interrupted is because of the hard work of potentially a lot of the folks, parents in this room, or even themselves, but all the farm workers out there every single day who are often undocumented immigrants themselves, who work very hard to make this country work and to make this world work. And so I think we need to recognize that and understand that farm workers are professionals and they deserve a lot more than they have right now.
So very true. And then I got a comment and then another question. So comment is just a great way to use his legacy as a platform to further benefit the farm worker community. Cesar Chavez definitely paved the way for our Hispanic community. Definitely agree. The other question, congratulations on your positive experience at Bakersfield. Can you share how many of your aunts, uncles, and cousins attended college?
Yeah, good question. So of my aunts and uncles, there's 8 of them. Only one of them went to college. So my dad didn't go to college. And so, yeah, he went to UCLA and then went to Santa Clara Law School. So he's the oldest in the family and he's the most educated in the family. And then after that, nobody else went to college. Maybe some courses here or there, but nothing to the extent that I've done. And then within our family, yeah, it's been very scattered in terms of college retention. But I think what's very interesting is that yes, our last name is Chavez, and yes, we do enjoy some privileges. Don't get us wrong there. That's absolutely true. At the same time, we're also fall victims to a lot of the systemic things that affect Latinos and working people and minorities across America, right? So if you look at our family, it may be a little higher than the Latino national average for folks who go to college, but I don't think it's as high as individuals who may come from white backgrounds or more privileged backgrounds. So, even within our own family, there's things that we have to work on, but but I think that just speaks to the work that we all have to do, right? That speaks to the work that you have to do as young college students who are starting your career, is figuring out how to navigate those spaces, but also reaching out when it's appropriate for help. There's folks out there who are willing to help. And the most important thing is as you're learning this process and as you're going through it for yourself, remember that information and that experience that you're getting is going to be valuable to a kid at Dinuba High School, is going to be valuable to a kid at your old high school. And so the important thing is that, like I talked about, people paved the way for us to be here today. Now, the question we have to ask ourselves, are we just going to sit here and not do anything else? Or are we going to further expand the opportunities for others? And so I think if we really want to do right by not only by ourselves, but by our community, is that when we finish our educations, make sure that whatever we do, we leave it in a better place for other people to come in and be more successful than us.
Well, and then this last question here, how does the Cesar Foundation view our national immigration policy, and do undocumented workers join unions?
Can you be a little more specific on that? I think I mentioned the Farm Worker Modernization Act, and the Chavez Foundation is very supportive of the Farm Worker Modernization Act, which allows for a pathway to citizenship for farm workers. Essentially, if they've been working here for some time, it's a tiered approach to doing it. I think there's definitely some work that we have to do at the border. There's, some crises there. And so, we're optimistic about what the administration's response is going to be, but we also have to be, firm and kind of stating what we would like to see for more humane and more just immigration policies and reform. And then you mentioned something about the union.
Do undocumented workers join unions?
Yeah, so actually this is the United Farm Workers was one of the first unions in the 1960s when they began their union. A lot of other national labor unions had excluded undocumented workers, but the the UFW did not ask your citizenship status when asking if you wanted to become a part of their union. So undocumented workers have always been a part of the United Farm Workers, and now they make up a majority of it.
Wow. Thank you again so much. I don't see any more questions, but I also know that that pretty much rent our time. And so we thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We really appreciate it. Let's have a virtual round of applause for Andres just for sharing all this information that I feel like many of us are very much well aware of, but to be, refreshed on all this information again, and as well as for us to get involved as well. We really appreciate it. I know we have an instructor out at Daniel, but super appreciative for you to be sharing all this with his students. So you're sharing this with many generations. And so thank you once again. Vanessa, do you have anything else?
No, I don't. Thank you so much, Andres. Thank you all for being here today.
So thank you all again, once again. We really appreciate it. Andres, we hope to have you in person sometime in the future. We really enjoyed this, even in a virtual space. I can only imagine how much more impactful it'll be, when you do get to step foot on our campus.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you again, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your afternoon.